In the mid-1800s, Jim Flint lived and worked as a hired gunman in the Wild West. He had a hideout in the lava beds in New Mexico. On a recent trip back from Arizona, me and my brother swung by. We found his hideout. Here's the story. Before we get into the story of Jim Flint, the skull that you saw on the thumbnail is just an animal skull, most likely a mule deer. It was found in the hideout. Yes, it is clickbait. It's how we get our views, unfortunately. Here's the story. So Flint was a character fabricated by the Western author Louis L'Amour. Yes, it is all fiction. He never existed in real life. However, when Louis L'Amour wrote a book, he wrote about real places, and he had a lot of historical facts included in his books. Flint, as the book is called, is one of my favorites from Louis L'Amour. The story is about James T. Kettleman, who was an orphan boy when his parents got killed in a wagon train massacre, and Jim Flint, the hired gunman, picked him up and took care of him. Jim Flint was a murderer by hire, so most of his killing, I think, was done from a hidden position. But he made sure that James T. Kettleman, this kid, was taken care of and got schooling. When James T. Kettleman was a teenager, he was with Flint when Flint got into an altercation in a poker game, and there was a gunfight. Through a blaze of gunfire, James T. Kettleman, a teenager, drug his buddy Flint out the door and to a doctor, leaving multiple people dead behind him. Jim Flint later died of his wounds, and James T. Kettleman, trying to escape his reputation as the kid at the crossing, moved out east and became a wealthy businessman. After dealing with some illnesses, he saw a doctor. The doctor says that he has cancer and he has a short time left to live. So James T. Kettleman, the wealthy millionaire, took up the name Flint, hopped on the Santa Fe, Kansas Railroad, and headed west to find the hideout that Jim Flint had found when he was doing his work. And there, James T. Kettleman was going to go to die by himself. The hideout is in the lava beds south of Grants, New Mexico, which is now El Malpais National Monument. I don't know how to pronounce that, but I will be putting it on the screen. In that gnarly, cragged lava rock, that river of lava, are openings of grassy fields, kapukas. I don't know how you pronounce that either, but it's an island of grass or oasis in the lava. In one of these kapukas, that's what I'm going to call it. I'm sorry if it's wrong. Jim Flint found his hideout, and he built a cabin. He walled in an overhang with some rocks to build a cabin. Then there was a tunnel over to another hideout, a much larger oasis where he kept horses. So when James T. Kettleman, aka Flint II, he hopped off the train east of McCarty's is still there. He hiked over across Cabalita Mesa. Don't know if that's how you pronounce it. These words in New Mexico are insanely hard. Hiked up, looked over the lava beds, hiked down off of that mesa, found a crack in that lava wall, and found Jim Flint's old hideout. From there, he went through the tunnel over to a horse pasture, which consisted of 200 to 300 acres. In the book, it says 300 acres, and there was some horses in there. Now, again, this is all fictional. The place does exist. We were there. We were in the hideouts. So I've been wanting, over the years, to find this location, among other locations that Louis L'Amour has talked about. But this was one of the big ones I wanted to find. And in doing some research, I came across a father and two sons who had been there. And in that little article online, it stated that it looked much like Louis L'Amour described it in his book. So I was even more excited. I wanted to go. In that article also said that there was no river or cabin, no creek or cabin. So, and I figured that would be made up. So on a trip back from Arizona, me and my brother, we stopped in and we found the hideout. We climbed up on top of that mesa. We saw the view that Flint 2, James T. Kettleman saw, right there by the Narrows, south of Grants, New Mexico. There's a little area they call the Narrows. It's got the mesa on the cliff on the one side, and then the lava beds, the lava rock right next to it, and just in a little area where Highway 117 runs through. We parked in that little day use area south of the Narrows, just south of the Narrows. We hiked, there's a trail that hikes up to the top of the mesa, and then we came down and we hiked across the lava into the Big Horse Meadow. Now, from the mesa, you can see one island of one kapuka, one grassy island in the lava rock. I would have guessed 20, 30 acres. Louis L'Amour said the first hideout, the hideout where the cabin was in, was scarcely an acre. But then later in the book, it says that he sat outside his cabin and looked across the acres. We were in the horse pasture the first evening. We weren't sure if that's what it was or not. It wasn't exactly how we had pictured it in our heads, obviously. So we went back to town where we had cell service, and we stayed the night at the Love's truck stop in our van. We woke up, we did some more research, and we found that this father and two sons who had been there in the hideouts, this little article I had read online, that the father had written a book. His name is Bert Murphy, and he wrote Trailing Louis L'Amour in New Mexico. I wanted to get my hands on this book. Of course, Amazon doesn't deliver to Love's in a few hours. We didn't have a lot of time, so we decided to try the local library, and we were in luck. we were excited. The library is such a great resource. Let's not forget our libraries. They had the book. We sat down, we snapped some pictures, put the book back on a shelf, and once again headed south to this hideout. So according to Bert Murphy, Flint 2 would have headed south from the Narrows, around the lava, and entered his hideout from south of the horse pasture. South of the horse pasture, there's a little oasis, a little kapuka, where they claimed he entered in. That was where his hideout was. And then north of that was a horse pasture, which opened up, which was 200 to 300 acres. They said 200 acres. Bert said 200 acres. Louis L'Amour said 300. I don't know how many acres. It's kind of hard to tell. It was big, and it was a nice horse pasture. Would have, done well for horses. So to be honest, I was a little disappointed. The hideout, the small kapuka, explained in Louis L'Amour's book, had 30 to 50 foot walls with overhangs. That's where he walled in a rock, he took an overhang, he put a rock wall in front of it. That's where Flint's cabin would have been. And then there should have been a tunnel or a lava tube tunnel over to the bigger horse pasture. The walls weren't 30 to 50 feet. We could step up a couple feet and be out on the lava. We didn't find a tunnel over to the horse pasture. That being said, it may have caved in. Those tunnels are, what happens is lava, when lava is flowing, like in a river, the outer surface cools and hardens, and the inside keeps flowing, then leaving a hollow tube. I've been in a few of them in Idaho. So they do exist. I'm sure they are all over the place out there in that lava bed. Lots of them have just caved in at this point. The horse pasture wasn't like I had imagined it. I had imagined it was kind of flat with the walls around it. It was actually a hill with the cliff on the one end. But between that cliff and the lava that had flowed around it was another little pasture area. And in that little area between the cliff and the lava, we found a cave. The cave was very small. It did have a shelf in the back. It was human made. It had some rocks built up in the front. Could this have been what Louis L'Amour was talking about? It's a lot smaller than I thought it would be. Maybe. From the cabin, you couldn't have really looked out across your pasture. It was hidden back in some tight areas, and it was small. But Somebody made it. And another problem is it was in the horse pasture and not in the smaller hideout. Even though I was disappointed because I had this picture in my mind. If it had water, it would have been a great hideout. Plenty of wood, game. You might have to venture outside the lava beds to find enough game, but you could have planted and grown stuff, grown veggies, a garden there. So Bert claims they entered from the south end of the hideouts. From my understanding of the books and from the description Louis L'Amour gave, I would have said that he found the crack to enter the hideout somewhere in the Narrows, where that lava rock is close to the mesa cliff edge. Just inside that was another kapuka. This grassy area was north of the horse pasture. I would have said that would have fit the description a lot more. I would think that would have been his hideout, even though it was 20, 30 acres. And then from there, he went over to the horse pasture. Once again, there was no cave there. The walls were a little taller in that grassy area. You could see into that grassy area from the mesa. I'll have to read the book again, Flint book again, but I think Buck done when he was hunting Flint, James T. Kettleman, that he was able to see into the hideout. And in the book, it says Flint saw a flash from field glasses. My guess is it was the grassy area north of the horse pasture that the hideout was in instead of the south. But Bert probably knows more than I do. The other books Bert Murphy writes about in here is Kilo, Conager, Flint obviously, Shellacko, the Daybreakers, Radigan, and trailing to the showdown at Yellow Butte. So I'll be interested to head back out to New Mexico to find the rest of these locations. In the story, Grants was called Los Alamitos, and in fact, that was the name of the town when it first sprung up. Little Cottonwoods is what it was named, Los Alamitos. Later was changed to Grants. McCarty's still exists. I'll have a picture of old McCarty's. That's where Flint sent telegrams from. He jumped off of the train east of there. And then Horse Springs was way south of the hideout, where he went and picked up supplies and books. There's a picture of the old station in Horse Springs. I just watched the movie Conager, where that took place in just south of where the story Flint took place. And Conager swung by Horse Springs Station, obviously just a movie, to trade some rifles for supplies. El Morro is the rock that Flint saw from the mesa. Even though I was a little disappointed in the details, it was cool to visit the hideout. It was cool to see what it looks like in the area. It's a really good novel. You should read it. Love Louis L'Amour books. I've read most of his stuff 3, 4, 5, 6 times, and will continue to do so when I get time. The lava rock was as described in Louis L'Amour's books, where there was just big hunks of rock, just like they were thrown on top of each other. There was rock that was all wrinkly like the skin of an elephant, and it is nasty, gnarly stuff. It is hard on shoes, I'm sure. I don't know how the deer get across it. I'm sure they don't travel on it a lot. We were able to walk up and down rocks that were at that angle because our shoes just stuck to it. Yeah, boots wouldn't last long on that lava rock. Your feet wouldn't last long. It is nasty. That is the story of Louis L'Amour's book, Flint. It exists. The stuff is there. My guess is Louis L'Amour took some maps, saw the little islands in the lava, wrote a story on them. He had to make it good. It's a fictional writer, right? So he added some things like the cabin and the creek and the wall height. I don't know if he was ever in there. Quite possibly he was. I know he was in the area. Also, some topographical maps had come out a few years prior to him releasing the book, and Louis L'Amour was really good at reading topographical maps. So his son stated on a Facebook post that he sometimes wrote books based on maps. This is not my normal content, but like, share, subscribe, go find it. It's an adventure. Read the book, it's good. I'm CJ. This is the Amish Potato. We will see you next time. Handcrafted by an Amish harness maker In the small town of Shipshewana, Indiana, our belts are made of genuine water buffalo and cowhide leather. Unlike the cheap leather belts purchased at big box stores that fall apart within a year, these belts are made from the same leather used in making horse harnesses for hundreds of years and will last you for many seasons to come. Get your quality Amish-made belt today at theamishpotatocompany.com.